The next speaker would be Professor Eileen Gambrill. Please come forward. Thank you.
This is certainly the most spirited and I just also light. At least I recognized it. Shows the importance of being reality focused. Well, I came up in thinking about this that it seems to me that there are a few terms we can talk about. We can talk about evidence philia, evidence phobia, and perhaps even bipolar evidence-based research, back and forth between the two, although I've not found any of those. I found people either stuck in the one or stuck in the phobia, or actually having escaped both of them. For those of you who have read some of my work, I've always been interested in why people don't use the little bit of knowledge that we have. I mean, no matter what the profession. Like Popper would argue that our ignorance is vast. In fact, I really wonder if we should change to a focus more on avoidable ignorance or unavoidable ignorance than focusing on what we know. And one of my very favorite websites is Duets, which is a database of uncertainties about the effectiveness of treatments. They were so concerned because we live in the sea of inflated claims, and there's a natural reaction to this. There's a sea of inflated claims about what we know. For example, someone could have done their doctoral dissertation, recording this entire 2-day enterprise, identify all the claims, categorize them by type, claims about risks, claims about causes, claims about assessment methods, claims about assessment frameworks, claims about cost benefits, claims about harms, although I'm not sure I bet that I would predict, bet you $100 that would be the lowest category, since that seems to be a taboo in our area, which I'll say about another in a second. So, and then you could see, so what is the evidentiary status of each of those claims? I prefer the term evidentiary status, because when you say base, it kind of connotes that there's really something to stand on, and typically there's not. I read very widely in many different professions, and so what has been coming out for the last 15 years in the area of healthcare is a steady stream of the lack of replication. Most cancer studies cannot be replicated. Now they're turning the lens in psychology to, for example, research in social psychology. Most studies, most findings so far cannot be replicated. And I think one thing that illustrates is the larger environment in which academics and researchers work. They are constantly urged, you must be original. In fact, I would think probably in most research-run universities, you would not be allowed to do a replication. So replication is systematically kind of put down and made very difficult, and it's such an important thing. So in reaction to these excessive claims, I think there's been a similar kind of backlash, similar in its excessiveness in throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And there are a few babies that have gone out with that. One is this consistent, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's not reading the original sources. I don't know if it's reading and not paying any attention to them. But it's very clear when you read original sources that the process of evidence-based practice has never been simply about randomized controlled trials. It has chapter after chapter, has a whole chapter on questions that require qualitative methods. It all depends on the question. It's situations like this that got me interested really in propaganda, because a lot of the methods that are going on here are highly propagandistic. I'm defining propaganda as arriving at beliefs and actions with the least thought possible. Contrary to critical thinking, which is arriving at well-reasoned thoughts and behavior, some of the classic propaganda methods are attacking, like saying something, for example, impugning the motives of your opponent. That was very classic. That's a very classic propaganda method. Straw man arguments are one of the classic ones. You distort. I distort your position because I don't like it. And if my position is kind of new, because the process of evidence-based practice was really an innovative idea, very focused on the practitioners and the clients. Like, Aaron asked you to raise your hands. Who's here? How many researchers? How many practitioners? How many clients are here? We do not have one client. I never give a talk in the UK without there being some client advocates in the room. We are very behind here in the United States and involving clients in all levels. It must have been at least 10 years ago that I read a study by Henley that described the involvement of clients in 103 randomized controlled trials in terms of the planning of the study, the interpretation of the study, the writing of the study. It's not as though clients are not involved in research very heavily in other parts of the world, and we really lag behind that. This distraction, these what I call, they're avoidable distractions, and they have heavy opportunity costs. I think the metaphor is a good idea. I kind of prefer perhaps the metaphor of a garden, you know, with hundreds of seeds, which are young human beings, as I always love Hannah Arendt's phrase. So we can be optimistic because there always are the new ones. These are the new babies coming into the world, because you never know what a new one will do. You know, they hopefully have all these seeds of all these new human beings coming up, be able to develop and flourish. Because we know now, particularly in our, I don't know what it is, it's our fascination with psychiatric nosology, and our just, it's kind of almost just talk about environmental distress. But we really have to be, I think, much more, and can be, much more attentive to documenting this. I mean, the studies linking depression and anxiety with environmental distress are overwhelming, I think, in their evidentiary status. Not one-to-one, but pretty heavy. We know what some of them are. Perhaps we need more storefront centers, you know, in different neighborhoods. So the other thing, just let me close, is that I thought, well, what are other kind of taboos? I think there's almost kind of like a taboos, and one of them is harm. We have very few studies of harm in the social work literature, and those studies we have, they were never mentioned in my MSW or my Ph.D. program. How many here have heard of the Blenkner study? There's So she was very interested in case management with the frail elderly. So she did this beautiful randomized controlled trial, randomly assigned clients to an intensive case management method and a usual case management method. And lo and behold, she found over a long period of time at the end that there was an increase in mortality in the intensive case management. So therefore, if you got special services, I'm always very suspicious of that term after reading this study. If you got special services, you were more likely to die earlier. So it's so important, if we really care about people, we don't have the luxury of not thinking that we could be harming as well as helping. And also, we really don't have the luxury of not looking at what our errors are. We have almost no information about errors. And as I mentioned this morning, and I'll close with this, we also really haven't taken the opportunity to identify what are the client's questions, not just the practitioners, but the client's questions. And practitioners are in the best situation to do that. So I hope we don't waste time in misrepresenting positions to actually, we have too much other things to do. And I think, I always have thought, that all our hearts are in the right place. And so I don't think we should waste time getting to work.
Thank you so much. Earlier, I didn't want to give more time for you to ask questions. So to only spend 10 minutes, that's wonderful.